What are some of the key steps that you take when you first get in seat at a company where you're tasked with creating or reinvigorating or somehow injecting new life into brand with a capital D?
The biggest thing that I think I do when I first get in is really just talk to customers, really understand customers, really understand where the gaps are, what's working, what's not working in terms of communication, who are we talking to now.
How have you navigated or been part of brand evolutions in the past?
I think the biggest thing about a brand redesign or a brand evolution is the why. The worst thing you could do is come in and be like, I don't like how that looks. We need to change it.
Welcome to Growth Talks, where we dive deep into the world of growth and marketing with industry leaders. I'm Christina, the General Manager of Offline at Right Side Up. Today we're speaking with Chiyong Jones, the VP of Brand Marketing at Kajabi. She is an award-winning marketer and a creative leader with experience across marketing, brand strategy, product marketing, integrated advertising, and film and digital production. Prior to Kajabi, she was the CMO at Personal.ai, and he built the brand and creative teams at GoodRx and Honey. In this episode, we're discussing how to build a brand from scratch, scaling a brand as you grow, and of course, how to measure the impact of brand marketing. So let's get into it.
Today, we're speaking with Chiyong Jones, the VP of Brand at Kajabi. And I am so excited to have Chi on the show. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
I'm excited to be here.
I think there's probably some people listening and watching that are going to be like, oh, we're going to spend a ton of time talking about brand and its impact on growth this episode. But I do think that sometimes there's this interesting tension and back and forth between brand and growth-focused teams. And so I do want us to spend a little bit of time setting up the stage because you've helped build up the brand with a capital B at a variety of companies. And a lot of people, a lot of marketers don't realize how foundational that can be to the growth marketing work that we do. So just to level set, like what are some of the key steps that you take when you first get in seat at a company where you're tasked with creating or reinvigorating or somehow injecting new life into brand with a capital D?
The biggest thing that I think I do when I first get in is really just talk to customers, really understand customers, really understand where the gaps are, what's working, what's not working in terms of communication. Who are we talking to now? Are we saturated in some audiences? Do we need to expand beyond? Is our messaging truly resonating or not? Are our ads degrading right now? So I think it's really about where are we in terms of the customer set and how many people we can reach and who we're talking to, and seeing if there's an opportunity to expand it out a little bit. But really just like starting at the messaging level for people and starting at the positioning level is a big thing, because if you don't have that right, everything else you build on top of it is kind of going to crumble down, and you're just kind of guessing and trying some things and experimenting, which can be helpful. But in the long term, I think consistency starts to build equity, and that's one of the most important parts of brand. So that's what I like to do first. It's just like get in there, engage with customers, and understand where our business is in relation to the customers themselves.
There are so many factors that go into establishing brands and building a brand identity. And I know a lot of times we try to, I think a common distillation of it is like a visual aid guide, or basically like your brand on a deck or your brand deck, or I'm forgetting the 18 other words this industry has created for it. But I do think that there are so many fundamentals that go into establishing a brand identity. And I guess if we could establish, or I should say, elaborate on what some of those might be, because I think for a while there, brands got a little, I'll say lazy. I think we got very into like, let's just get a sans serif font and a couple of colors and a website and a position, just some position. And it was like, boom, you got a brand. It's like almost like startup in a box, but that's easy to do. But what are some of the factors that go into creating a brand and like a brand's visual identity or emotional identity to give it some staying power?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think everyone, when they think of a brand, they're like, oh, I see that blue color and that's your brand. Or, hey, I see that logo or that font and that's your brand. And I think that's one very important component of it, right? But I think we have to think about it as a cohesive kind of system. And some of the biggest, most important parts are really understanding the problem you're solving for the customer and starting there, and starting with what is our role? Why are we here? Why do we exist? And then looking at, once you answer that, you can start to understand, okay, now what do we actually want to accomplish? What does success look like if we're successful with our customers? And what do we want the future to look like? And so you start to set up your mission, your vision, your positioning. And then you start to look at like, okay, if we were a person, who would we be? So how would we behave? How should, every time a customer comes into contact with us, whether it's our website, whether it's an ad, whether it's a real person at an event or customer support, or you're going through recruiting, brand is a touch point in all of those things. And so your behavior, how you speak, how you show up visually, all of those are really important. And they're all pieces of a broader narrative that you're trying to form. And again, it's consistency, it's building equity, it's building trust. And a lot of those things like, color theory, even the font choice you use or the tone in which you say things can appeal to a lot of different types of people. And so you have to think about how all of those work together. We are literally going through that exercise now at Kajabi. And it's been amazing to go through that and see, as we've been taking the rest of the company through it and showing them where we're coming from, it is that kind of wow moment of, oh, it's not just we changed the color because we like this color better. It's hey, this color represents something. It symbolizes something. If we're talking about progress and momentum and motivation, what colors can evoke that? How do we display that in actual motion and transition and behaviors through that? So like you can really see how that gets interpreted into behavior in ways that subconsciously and consciously that people can watch it and look at it and feel it and can actually get some emotional pull from it. That's really at the heart of what we try to do as a brand, is like build emotion into something that's fairly abstract and cold sometimes.
There's so many different treatments that a brand has to be able to be expressed in. I really appreciate the message of consistency, because there are some times where it's almost like a needle scratch. It's like good creative and bad creative. Like somebody once asked me, like their one of their interview questions was like, what do you think makes good creative? I'm like, I can spend an hour telling you what makes bad creative. Besides budget, because I know that that's a big part of it, what are some of the differences between like working for some of the big corporations you've worked on versus standing up a creative function from scratch, which you've done several times over successfully now?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think what it forces you to do is understand and be really sharp about the constraints, because everything is a compromise, right? Even there's no such thing as you have enough budget. You're going to always ask for budget. And I remember, working in the agency world, is like, that's the first question we always ask is, what's the budget? And they're like, well, think big and see what we can do and we'll figure it out. And you always get to this amorphous place and you come up with these $1 million ideas and you're like, this is what it costs. And you're like, well, we actually have $100,000. What can you do with that? So it's a fun problem to have, because if you understand what's important, and it actually, those constraints force you to really get to the heart of what's important. Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish and what can you do without? And so I think that that's the biggest difference, is like, yeah, you're working with a different scale, both in terms of budget, both in terms of like the size of the team, where you are in kind of your marketing journey in terms of the brand itself. And so I think the biggest thing I've adjusted to when I first come in is like just understanding that. Hey, where have we been marketing wise? What's been successful? What hasn't been successful? What's our aspirational point that we want to get to? We can't get to that in 3 months, 6 months, a year, but maybe it's a 5-year thing. But how do you start building the foundations and the roadmap to get to that bigger thing? I know when I first got to the startup world, it was like, everyone was like, yeah, we're really excited. Let's go do this thing. And you go do the thing and they're like, we can't do that. We don't have the team to be able to execute and we don't have the budget. And so you pull back. But I think what it taught me was really ask the right questions, really get to what are we trying to get to, what's really important, and then think through how can you actually execute it. I think what's interesting about the world today is there are so many up and coming production companies with completely different models now than before, right? And there's different ways to get creative staff in and get marketing support in. There's not one single model like it used to be. And so there's a lot more flexibility to help startups and brands that are earlier in their journey. And so it's understanding who you can tap and get into. And you really have to be scrappy in some cases, but it's actually pretty fun, I think. It can get frustrating, but it's fun.
Yeah, I hear you. And actually, like, just to pull on that, thinking about how it can get frustrating or even just like challenges that you have to overcome. I actually don't mind being in a box, whether it's like budget induced or regulatory inflicted. Like, I've done a lot of work in healthcare and financial services, and you got to be real creative and get real friendly with the lawyers. We're often really lovely human beings who want to help you do it in a way, but are just like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. But it's funny because you don't often have those challenges on the startup end. But for the smaller companies that you've worked for that have gone on to become larger ones, what are like the common earlier stage challenges that you see besides capital?
I think a big challenge is usually that there hasn't been a lot of message testing or a lot of like at bats at things like that, where you're really going at high conversion tactical things, usually to grow your brand early stages, right? Because it's really about high growth, high momentum. And then as you start to expand out and look at other channels and even looking at how you can expand those existing digital channels, it's like, what haven't we tried? What messaging truly resonates? Versus even when I get into a lot of places, I'll get the list of, oh, we've tried this. But when you dig in, you realize, oh, you tried it, but you did it this way, and maybe that wasn't the best way, or maybe there's alternatives to that approach that is still worth considering, and it could potentially be an unlock. Sometimes those doors don't lead anywhere, but I think it's important to go in with a really open mind and listening to both what's been done and what hasn't been done and where we're trying to get to. So I don't mind those small budgets early, because really, again, it's about testing. And you can do simple things to test. You can just test headlines and just put a bunch of headlines out there. You can test visuals, you can test simple things like that. But you eventually want to get those little wins to allow you to push that into something bigger that's a slightly bigger scale and get to that point. But I think it's like early on, you're really trying to not take these massive swings right off the bat, because there's learnings that you have to have. Like the swings will come, but you have to understand what you're looking for, right? If we want to continue the baseball analogy, you have to understand what the pitches are before you try to take a swing at it, right? And the better you are at predicting those things, the better potential results you can have. But what I love about startup world is they're willing to take those swings, right? Because you're usually a challenger brand and you're trying to disrupt the space, or you're trying to take a little piece of the pie. And so you can't outspend them. So you need to outvoice them. You need to out attention them. And you do that through using a lot more creativity than, oh, this is how we do it, or we can just throw budget and impressions behind this and it'll get the airtime it needs. It's like, no, how do we really create something people care about and want to talk about? And that's the most fun work, I think. And it's been the most fun work I've done.
It sounds so fundamental to think about like user testing and just creative testing and all of those things. And I remember one of the most jarring things for me when I came kind of from the general advertising side of the industry to growth marketing and then went in-house and peeled back how it was done. I was like, oh, no one's ever tested this. And it was honestly, it was shocking to me, because I had come from traditional New York agency world where it was just like, oh, this message has been tested 8 ways from Sunday. Like, you're borderline spending too much money on testing sometimes, where you're just like, now I have so much data, I don't know what to do with it. But what are some like lower cost, lower stakes ways that people can get into like creative testing, user testing, et cetera? Any tips?
When I was at Honey, one of the most amazing things we had was just like this automated Slack bot. And it just literally every review would pop up on the Slack bot. And every single day, I would just go through the hundreds of reviews that day. And you'd be amazed at how creative people are. If you ever go on, like, you find a funny TikTok video and you go into the comments are often funnier than the video. And you almost start to look at that, right? And so I think people will tell you what they like and what they don't like. People will tell you what's resonating, because you'll start to see the trend of it popping up numerous times. And you can just take little bits of that and start to include it in your work and see where it goes. And I think that's the simplest trick. It's like, you're not trying to overcomplicate it, and you don't have to over-engineer or over-create the thing. Sometimes the simplicity is what you'll get information with. And I like to use that. Again, I love using data as the inputs for something creative, versus I don't let data be the dictator of, hey, we have to say exactly this because this data point said this, or we need to use this color because it said this. I like to use the data and get as much as I can, but figure out what it's actually guiding me towards. And I think that those things can help, because really it's about messaging, and the ads are trying to bring traffic over. And then you're going to start to test little things on your landing pages to understand where the conversion parts are. And sometimes separating those two things aren't always intuitive or obvious to early stage brands when you come in. And I think that that creates a lot of good, cleaner signals for us coming in, because like you said, a lot of it is like over testing everything. And you're testing a lot and you're doing a lot, but are you gathering the right information? And do you actually understand the funnel properly and have it all kind of segmented out?
It's so funny. It kind of reminds me a little bit about, obviously now I do a lot of work in podcast advertising and influencer marketing. And it is always so tricky to script influencers because what they're influential for is relating to their audience in a way that feels authentic. And I feel like the kernel of that is what you're picking up. Like I am totally guilty of that when I'm scrolling TikTok, which I spend too much time doing. My husband would agree. Literally, I'm like race to the comments because often the comments are like just perfection. It becomes like a full circle thing. And I think we have this perception of brand with a capital B being like a monolith almost, like something that's done. We made a brand. You're like, okay, but that's not, besides the fact that just like the world is changing, startups especially have to evolve their brand as they scale. And I have to imagine you've got some good examples or stories or just thoughts along the lines of like, how have you navigated or been part of brand evolutions in the past, and either in-house or as an agency leader? Because it is so interesting watching brands evolve over time, not just watching their logos change, but watching as they add new products and services or change the way they talk about stuff.
I think the biggest thing about a brand redesign or a brand evolution is the why. Why are you doing it? Right? Usually there needs to be something impactful that's happening in the business that like creates that moment for you or creates the need for you, right?
Not just hiring a new CMO.
Exactly. The worst thing you could do is come in and be like, I don't like how that looks. We need to change it. Because if you come into an early stage startup, you're not going to like how anything looks. It's just not built that way. It's not meant to be built that way, right? And so, yes, as a creative person coming into that and seeing that, it's very cringe worthy. But I think the big thing is aligning with the leadership and understanding, hey, look, either we're shifting our business slightly, we're repositioning, our narrative has changed and what we're aiming to do has changed, or simply, hey, our product suite has changed and we need to slightly pivot that. And then there are times where you're like, look, we're at a different stage. Our product or our design or our brand needs to feel more premium because there's a trust element, there's a relationship element that comes through that. And so the inconsistency starts to degrade the trust level or the familiarity with the brand. And so those are also equally good reasons. But I think generally when it has business impact, obviously the C-suite is going to really be receptive to, okay, how do we get more out of our brand? And that's when you start to work that. And it's an investment.
Yeah.
It's you're turning over a lot of things and you're adding a lot more work. You're basically doing double time work for about 3 to 6 months, depending on how big you are. It's hard. And you said monolith, and I think it's right. I think back in the day when we were doing rebranding things or building brands, it was really simple, right? Because there were a few channels. We didn't create as much content, right? So when you had a website up, it was up like that for a while. You weren't testing and iterating every piece of that thing every single day, right? And you didn't have 10 social channels that all service different types of people for different use cases and have different styles. Like all of that is a reality now. And so when you're building a brand now, it's you want the core, you want the narrative to stay tight, you want the values to stay tight, you want your purpose to stay tight. But the system has to be really flexible because you're not going to shoehorn something that looks very much like an ad in a social space because that everyone's allergic to that exact thing. And so you need to figure out what elements of your brand shows up in those situations and make sure you're going into building your brand with that in mind of you're building something cohesive but super flexible for all the different use cases you're going to need.
I love that. It's so funny because to the monolith point, like people think that brands like Coca-Cola or Nintendo or whichever, there is like this perception that it's like, well, it's never, it's the brand, like it's never changed. If you look at the logo history alone for so many of these brands that are household names and you see how it changed to reflect the times, like sometimes the psychedelic-y logos that people were using in the 70s, whatever we thought the future was going to look like in the 80s and 90s when people started to play with that. It's so fascinating to me to watch how brands intentionally change over time. Kind of alluded to earlier, we have this bias in growth marketing in a way of, oh, that's like the brand's job. the brand team's
Mm-hmm.
job. Or we'll build the plane as, what is it? Build the plane as we fly it. It's great.
I've been on a lot of those planes.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, do you guys see that mountain over there? Because we are not at altitude right now. Like, how can we not? But it is kind of interesting. There is this tension for Right Side Up. I actually was in-house as the head of offline and brand at a small vacation rental startup. And there was just always so much tension between, are we doing this to grow the company? Are we doing this to establish this part of our brand or this element? And then also everybody's got sticky finger syndrome or too many cooks in the kitchen, where it's like, well, I really think this. And it's like that you are the furthest possible thing from our demographic that you could possibly be. So it's, how do you manage and mitigate and frankly encourage that alignment between brand and performance? Because it's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it starts with shifting the versus or into an and. Because look, at the end of the day, we're all trying to build this company. We're all trying to make the company successful. And all it is there's different time horizons for our work. Brand is more long-term, and it's building that brand health, it's building that continued awareness and growing that and bringing in more traffic, building it, bringing in more eyes, bringing in more attention, and consistently trying to keep the brand top of mind for people. So when they're ready to convert, all of the growth work, all of the conversion work, all of the performance work really works hard because we've primed them so that when they come down the funnel, they're ready to act. And when they're ready to act, they're thinking about us. Like, it all works together. But I think where the stickiness comes from, or where the tension comes from, is always budget, right? It's like, oh, I can drive this if you give me this money. If you give him that money, you're not going to see that. But it's unfair comparison because, again, longer horizon, and you will eventually see that. And for the brands that don't understand, listen, if you're not building that layer to look into the future, eventually you're going to hit that wall on the growth side, right? And if you don't have that stuff built, you're going to have to move into that, and you're going to have a longer time horizon to think about that. So I think I'm lucky at a place like Kajabi where we're at a stage where we've really looked at, and we have a CEO that really values understanding, hey, we're building a 10-year brand. We're building a 100-year brand. We're not building a brand of now and then we're going to exit and get out of this game. It's like, hey, we're building a business for the future, and we want to be successful. And so with that in mind, we want to have long-term success. And so let's invest in the brand. Let's invest in bringing people along, educating them, helping them. And if we do that, they will trust us with their business when it's right for them, and not trying to say, hey, you need this right now. And I don't think that has proven to work for us. And so I think I'm a bit in a lucky space right now where we understand the balance of the two. I don't think we ever get this early, we ever get the budget that we want to play with, but I think we're thinking about it and we're approaching it the right way, which is great.
I love that. And I mean, it is kind of funny to think about like the brand, the right now, the exit, et cetera, because there is so much pressure for that in high growth tech and in startup land, but like, you're no longer in the interest rate environment of 2021 into
Right.
early 22. So like, get ready for the long haul is what I've told a lot of my friends in-house it is a long haul play now. We are focused on building sustainable businesses more and more as an industry. Does that mean that we might have to be a little more mindful of budgets in the short term? Sure. Does it mean that we need to be a little more results focused in the short, mid, and long term? Yes. I don't think that discipline is necessarily a bad thing. I know that, to your point of building something that has staying power and longer lasting, et cetera, it can really be hard or challenging for people to think about how to measure brand impact or brand performance, or however you want to talk about it. And there is this misnomer that brand people don't measure anything. And it's like, no, that's, first of all, like, that's just literally not how this works. I shouldn't say that. I have seen it work that way. And there's always a kernel of truth in every stereotype about marketers, or just stereotype period. But there are ways to measure the impact of brand marketing. And I'm curious, like, what are the tried and true ones that you commonly go back to, or even some of the newer ones that you're excited about when it comes to how to measure the impact of brand marketing?
I don't think there's anyone that can say definitively, I've got the blueprint for measuring brand. And I think it's just difficult. That's true for everyone. I don't think we have I put this in here and I get this out. I know it right now. And I think that's what makes brand tricky. But there are signals and there are things you can do to try to track it over time. And again, longer horizon, let's see what signals we can get that gives us a sense of how the brand is doing. And then there are things that you track a little longer over time that helps you understand, okay, I can see that curve that we need to see. And so I think the obvious one that most brands do is a brand tracker, right? You're doing like a quarterly, a monthly, or a biannual survey of your customers or your potential customers, and you're asking them questions about your brand and asking them if they know your brand at all. And so I think those things can track it. I think the problem with those are they're moment in time surveys. And so oftentimes there's time that's passed, or maybe some of the stuff you've done has degraded over time and they're not as impactful, especially as an early startup. You're probably not sustaining that type of brand building over that long time. And so those get a little harder, but it does give you good signals, and you should be measuring that because you want some semblance of consistency in how you're asking the questions and what people think of you over time. But the more signal-based things that we're starting to look at more are like things like brand search volume. If you're putting work and messaging out into the world, theoretically, they should be searching for you more. Oftentimes, your CTAs and the buttons you want them to click, they're not clicking on that thing, but they'll remember your name or they'll remember some version of it and they'll type that in. And so that can give you a pretty good signal, especially if you're putting a good amount of spin at a very specific time. You can see that lift happen. And same thing with organic traffic or site visits. You can see those little spikes that we're looking at. So we do a combination of traffic, brand search volume. We look at just engagement in general on our content pieces, especially on our organic side. I think the telltale sign is like, are people actually viewing it? Are people actually sharing it? Are people commenting? I think that's a better indicator of brand health than, hey, someone watched it or I got a follow off of it. I just think that those things will come as a secondary kind of metric, but I think we really want to look at how people are engaging and is it really driving interest? And that's what we look at early in the funnel is like, can we get a good amount of interest coming through? And then eventually, if we're educating them properly, if we're truly a fit and we're resonating with them, they'll convert. I don't think it's like trying to force that conversion at that moment, right?
Yeah, especially for longer intent, longer consideration product. That's where the consistency comes in. And that's where one of the things that kind of makes me chuckle a little sometimes with startups is we like to Christopher Columbus stuff where we're like, oh my God, we discovered this. And it's like, reach and frequency have been concepts in marketing for quite some time. Unaided and aided brand awareness, you might call it something different, but even though you're not doing like a Millward Brown 9 box all the time or a quarterly NPS that is blah, 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 it doesn't have to be something that formal, but like the concepts that you're talking about are aided brand awareness, unaided brand awareness, intent, favorability. These are all of the things over time that you're like, those are really important health metrics. And there's a million different ways to measure them, but there's still brand health metrics that are important to measure.
Yeah, exactly. Brands have been doing this for hundreds of years. And it's often funny that the brands we look at with admiration, we quickly forget how much work they had to put in to build that brand. It wasn't just something that happened. And those brands have evolved over time and they've pivoted. But at the core, the really strong brands at the core are exactly what you thought they were. And they're always the same, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. This is a good time to take a quick beat. And we always play a game. You know me well enough that I can only be work related for so long. But we always play a little game called the A/B test because marketers love an A/B test. And we're going to ask some questions that are a little funsies, some that are a little work related. It's so funny because the growth marketers are like, okay, well, what data? Like, how do I'm like, just pick one. So just pick one. And if you want to elaborate, I might ask you to. And there are no right or wrong answers.
Nice.
So I'll start work related, long form or short form content.
Long form.
Just get a little more room to breathe.
You know, I'm a little older, and so I came from a film background. And so I like a good story and I like a good arc with my stories.
I like that. Okay, well, I might know the answer to this already, but vintage or modern?
I actually like modern.
I'm surprised.
Yeah. I like new things.
I know. I really do. It's so funny because people are like, you go to CES? I'm like, I'm going to go because I want to see stuff. Like, I love technology. I happen to love the industry I work in now. Winter or summer?
Ooh, summer. After New York winters, I do not want to go back to those wind tunnels in New York.
Literally the same. I grew up there. I love it. I love visiting. I want to eat all of the carbs, but then I'm going to come back home. And I mean, ask me that after what's about to be a solid week of 100-something degree temperatures, but I'll still take this over yellow and brown and gray snow. User generated or professionally produced content?
It depends on the quality. I think user generated can be really good quality without it looking professional. I find myself watching more YouTube videos and watching more things that are just people talking or people creating something fun. If it's an interesting idea, it's an interesting idea. So I think I lean now a little more TikTok and a little more YouTube than I used to.
That actually spoiled one of my questions, but TikTok or Instagram?
TikTok. Once Instagram moved away from imagery, I couldn't stay on board with it. So
I'm with you. It started to feel just like Facebook 2.0 after a while. I'm like, okay,
Totally.
this is too much. I'm also TikTok is just, people are endlessly creative on there. I find myself so inspired by what people create with, like you said, like nothing. And also like the algorithm knows me too well. It's like a little scary how much time I can sink in there.
I think the biggest interesting thing for me on TikTok is how you think something is very personal to you or just a thing between you and your friends, but it turns out it's so universal. Like a million people go through the exact same thing. You're like, oh, I didn't know someone else had gone through that or have felt that way. You know, it's so amazing.
It's very humanizing. It's like, I do think that we often as a society, like just lambast social media, like, rah, and then the social media is responsible for many of the ills that plague this generation. I'm not questioning that. But there is also that end of it that you're just like, when the internet also just unites behind something, it's like, oh, I love it. Like, it's just so great. You just feel, you feel like part of a collective humanity sometimes. Okay, marketing jingle or marketing mascot?
Ooh, I love a good mascot. I really do. I have not worked on a brand with a mascot, and I've always wanted to.
I'm just, listen, the opportunity is there. You could.
I thought about it. I pitched it. I pitched a mascot.
Nice.
Not seriously, but I have pitched a mascot.
Okay, agency or in-house?
In-house. There's benefits to both. I really loved the amount and diversity of problems and interesting ways you could solve it. But what I've really embraced and love now coming in-house is just how much impact you can have. And I think solving a different set of problems, like it's kind of the same master problem that you come back to every single day and you try to figure out a new way to solve the same problem. I think that that's just a total different world, but so interesting.
I love that. Strong copywriter or strong designer?
Ooh.
I didn't say they would be easy. I said you could pick one.
I'm going to go with I'm going to support my historical peoples and say copywriters. I think a good script is a great script, but yeah.
I'm with you. Last one, fashion for comfort or style?
I am a style person, although you can't see it by my t-shirt. I do love things that look good. Even if I have to suffer for it, I'm willing to take that hit.
I think, I was more like that in New York than I am now, but there's just something about like something really stylish, even if you're like, I'm going to be uncomfortable for a few hours, but looks great.
Yeah, when you're in New York, it's almost impossible to avoid it. Like you kind of have to, like you're just surrounded by people so much, and there's just like really well-dressed people.
My favorite thing is looking at all of like the street style blogs in New York and like different neighborhoods. It's full disclosure, we do some work together with Kajabi as part of the work that I do for Right Side Up. My team works with them on some of their podcast influencer marketing. But I, even from the beginning, was so fascinated by the notion of marketing to a creator audience, because it's almost like the marketing to marketers problem or challenge, because it's like, these are influential people that are going to be hard to influence. And so for anybody who is listening and doesn't know what Kajabi does, the company works to empower the creator economy, and it helps creators. It gives them the tools that they need in order to basically diversify their content across many different mediums and methods. And I could just see like that is just such a unique challenge, because the creator economy has diversified and changed so much even in the last couple of years. Like, what are some of the key trends that you've observed in your time at Kajabi that you've seen change in the creator economy?
So when you were saying creators influencing creators or creators talking to creators, I think what's interesting is that we are in a unique position where the people that we're working with have an innate and close relationship with the problem we're trying to solve. And so they oftentimes they can really articulate it in a way that feels very believable. And I love having conversations with them to understand that. Just the way that they relay back what I just said about our brand or what I just said about our product. They just have a different language that they use, then you're like, oh, okay, that's how you would speak about that. And so I think there's an interesting benefit inherent in that too. But I think what's changed in the creator economy, I think we went through this phase where there was an explosion of growth during the pandemic, right? Everyone was home. Often, like a lot of people that were working 9 to 5s suddenly found themselves with a lot of extra time, or they unfortunately lost their jobs. So they all came to social media and started taking the things they knew and started helping other people with it, or started creating content around it. But since then, in 2023, towards the end of 2022, we've come down from that. And so what this wave of creators that came in, what they quickly realized is this is a grind. Like building an audience is super hard. The algorithm is super hard. Like it's constantly changing. It's not always working the way you want it to or the way you think it should, and things are twisting and turning. And so I think what's happening is the sustainability of that craft and the sustainability of building a career as a creator is becoming harder and harder. And I think more people are realizing that. And so that's where a product like Kajabi is great and it's needed, is that, hey, we're not saying that YouTube and TikTok and Instagram are bad inherently, that you shouldn't be there. They're amazing at building audiences and being a distribution platform for your content and building an audience around you or what you do. But in order to actually create revenue, in order to actually create income for yourself, you need to do other things, because the algorithm is geared around distributing content, getting ad dollars into the ecosystem, not around building you as a brand, as a potential business. And so I think that's the shift. I think creators are starting to look at, okay, what's the economy part of creator economy actually mean? And how do I actually participate in that part? Because I think everyone gets excited by, I'm a creator and I'm creating cool content, but how do I keep being able to do that is getting income, building a business around the thing you do so that you can keep doing it. And I think that's the biggest shift that we're seeing right now.
Yes, it's wonderful that creators create. Also, I'm definitely going to stutter through that at some point, but that creators create, but ultimately there is a balance between making money and being able to do that full-time or part-time, or it's almost like a little gig economy reminiscent in a way. It requires some hustle to it, but to think about it from both a creator perspective and a brand perspective, because often the way that creators can monetize effectively is by partnering with brands. And I think it's a little bit of a basic question, but pretty fundamental, like why is it important for brands to build relationships with creators? And how do you think about identifying the right creators to partner with?
I think what's so valuable about creators is they aren't just an ad channel. They actually build super close relationships with their audience. And so when you're working with a creator that truly values the thing that you do and wants to speak on it and wants to collaborate with you, that goes a long way in that getting over the trust hurdle, right? And getting over hey, this creator has tried it. They vouch for it. They like it. And so when it works really well, I think it really does help you connect with their audience faster and more authentically than you can with running an ad. Running an ad means that message is coming from me or my company. Going and working with a creator there's that vetted process that comes into play that I think the audiences can find value in that. And I think that's why we value it so much, is creators already know the game of influencer marketing, of advertising and all that stuff. And so when you can really get a creator that truly values and trusts us, then that goes a long way in influencing their creator friends and creator audiences. And that's what we're really trying to tap into,
Yeah, I think that's just such a good place for brands to come from. I think it's anytime you have to force a fit. Like there have been some times where brands come to us and they're like, I really want to work with this podcast host. And the podcast host has never heard of the product. They don't have any interest in it. They can't use the product sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not it for you. Like the creator space that world is all about authenticity, not only for the creators themselves, but for the people who listen to and follow them. You can immediately tell sometimes when it's like, oh, they just did that for a paycheck. And like sometimes you're like, oh, I want to support that creator anyway. But the best partnerships, the best work comes, I think, from authenticity. So it's how do you harness that in your brand, and how can other brands ensure that they maintain that authentic connection as well?
We get inbounds, right, from creators and other management reps and everyone coming to us and saying, hey, this creator wants to work with you. I think you have to get comfortable saying no and understand, not trying to take advantage of every opportunity, because those opportunities might seem great in the moment or on paper, but if you really think about what you're trying to build towards, does that help you ultimately get there? You can get seduced by reach and impressions, but is it reaching the right people? Is that smaller audience but more loyal audience a better long-term play, and even a short-term play, really, because they're more engaged and they're more likely to want that product? I think you really have to stay true. If a creator says, hey, I don't know about that, or I don't know what you do, I think that there's that's kind of telling, right? That's a signal for you that maybe this isn't the right fit. And you can have further conversations to vet out if it truly is or not. But I think if a creator doesn't feel like they believe in what you're selling, then I don't think that's the right partnership. And I think we should get comfortable with that both ways. I think creators should also look at the brand and be like, I don't know if that's right for my brand, right? I respect that 100%. Like, I love when creators come in and say, yeah, I actually don't think our audiences match up. The audience you're looking for isn't really a core part of my demo. And then I'm like, yeah, that's amazing. That's perfect. Let's find a partnership that actually does work and makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, because it means, if anything, like, they're informed about what they need. You're informed about what you need. And I find, like, the times that I've had to say no in the course of business have always actually wound up working out for me in some way. Maybe I'll keep that brand or company or whatever in mind in the future. And if I'm doing something different, I'll reach back out to them. Or maybe telling a brand like, hey, no, you shouldn't launch that channel. Or no, I don't think we should work together right now. I think there's something so powerful in the word no. And we think of it as like negative, but there's an intentionality. And especially for the influencers, the influential people that we work with, I think influencer is such a loaded, sometimes dumb word for what is just, do you believe those people? Do you believe what they're selling you? Do you believe what they're saying? And I just think it's so powerful for brands to be able to enable those people, to enable people who have such different points of view. And to your point about the consistency and staying power of a brand, just because they express it in a different way. Like, haven't you been surprised sometimes at how some of the creators you work with express some of the brands that you work on?
I love it. I think we have to remember, inherently, we want to partner with creators because they're creative. Like, they know their audience and they know the inside things, they know jokes. They have these little relationship things that we don't have. And that's why we're tapping into it, right? And so I love it when creators come back and they do something a little wackier. They do something, as long as the overall essence of the brand and the messaging there. I love giving that freedom and saying, hey, you know your audience. Here's what we really are trying to communicate. How can we do that best? And you let us know, and then let's have a conversation about it. And I love that. I think that's the best approach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so intrigued by and inspired by the work that you're doing now, and just the way that you think about building a brand. It's something that's so fundamental to how we work as marketers that it gets taken for granted sometimes. Like I said, it gets taken for granted when it's great, and when it's bad, you immediately know. But in closing here, we like to ask a question, just because we hear the term growth hack all the time as marketers working in tech. And I think there's some things that you can do to like supercharge the short term of a brand, but what would you say is like a growth non-hack that's one of your favorites?
Growth non-hack. I don't know if this is the right answer, but I think humor is underutilized now. I think it used to be, there was an age around late 90s, early 2000s where humor was the thing. But I think it's become harder as, again, proliferation of content, what's funny, what's not funny. If you want to disarm someone and if you want to entertain someone, humor is one of the best ways to do it, but it's so hard to do. Again, what someone finds funny, someone else doesn't find funny. But when you do it right, it's a powerful, powerful way, because that's something people want to tell someone else about. It's something you enjoy consuming. It's got all the right elements. So I love it. I don't think it's right for every brand, but when appropriate, I think it's a great way to kind of get attention.
I love that. Like I said, fundamental, but such an interesting point. Like, brands don't have as much fun with some of those, with some things as they used to. And now there's the whole the brand has to stand for something. And it's like, listen, I just want to buy your cookies. I don't need to know what you think about the latest social justice issue. I appreciate where that's coming from, but sell me cookies. If you make me laugh along the way, I'll remember that forever, right?
Yeah. People remember how you made them feel. And that's what it's all about.
I love that. Well, that seems like a pretty good note to end on. Chi, thank you so much for all the time and all the wisdom and knowledge you dropped. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Christina. This has been great. I love talking with you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Growth Talks. We hope you found our discussion insightful and fun. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable content. And if you're excited and ready to start up-leveling your growth strategies and execution, Right Side Up has you covered. Right Side Up is a leading growth marketing agency that has partnered with over 1,000 companies of all stages and sizes to help them meet and exceed their growth goals. With expertise across all growth marketing functions, we can help you evaluate product market fit, develop customer acquisition strategies, navigate executional challenges and staffing gaps, and make pivotal decisions with confidence. And whether you need one individual or a custom-built, full-service team, we'll find you the right A+ talent. Visit us at rightsideup.com to see how we can help you and your company grow.